Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room was alive with energy. Maps unrolled across the wood, markers squeaked, fingers tapped rhythms of confidence. Voices overlapped in a chorus of certainty, like men who believed victory could be spoken into existence if they said it loud enough. But she didn't move. Her chair felt colder than the others. Her hands rested on the table, still as stone, while her eyes remained fixed on the map. She didn't blink as often as she should have. If anyone looked closely, they would have noticed the tension in her jaw, the quiet tightening of her throat every time someone cheered another detail of the plan. They didn't notice, because no one wanted to hear silence when confidence was easier. The general's voice carried over them all, strong, steady, too certain. We move at dawn, clean, swift, precision will win this. The words fell like steel on the table. No questions followed, just nods, tight smiles, and the clatter of pens against maps. But her silence stayed. Her silence wasn't confusion, it wasn't fear, it was warning. She lowered her gaze further, letting the brim of her cap shadow her eyes. Inside, a storm spun hard. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, the way her chest rose and fell faster than her outward calm suggested. She had been here before, in a room filled with confidence that felt like arrogance, surrounded by men who mistook eagerness for strategy. And she remembered what happened the last time. The memory came without invitation. It always did. A valley not unlike the one marked on the map tonight, radios crackling with static, then silence. She could still hear the silence, louder than any gunfire, the silence of men who never called back. Her stomach twisted. She had raised doubts then too, small ones. She had spoken of shadows, of timing, of unseen ground. They had brushed her aside, told her to focus on her part, not theirs. She had obeyed, because soldiers obey. And afterward she had carried their names, every one of them. Now she sat here again, watching a valley drawn in ink, watching men cheer like children at a game. One of the younger operatives leaned over the table. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from eagerness. He circled a point with his marker. Here, we cut straight through the valley, fastest route, minimal exposure. Minimal exposure. Her throat burned. She wanted to laugh, wanted to slam her hand against the table and shout, but she didn't. She had learned what shouting earned her. So she stayed silent. The valley wasn't exposure-free. It was exposure multiplied, a funnel of death. She could see it in her mind, the way sound would bounce, the way shadows would stretch, the way the enemy would need no effort at all. The marker squeaked again. The sound grated, almost mocking. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, she wasn't in the room anymore. She was back in that other valley, back in the dirt, crawling through echoes, blood staining the rocks, the sound of boots dragging across gravel, the scream of a man cut off too soon. She blinked hard, forcing herself back. Her brother's face came next. It always did. The smile he had carried even when life gave him little to smile about. The way he had told her she was strong enough, better than most. The way he had dared her to dream bigger than the fences of their childhood town. He had died before he could see her wear this uniform, before he could see her become the very thing she thought would make him proud. And yet, sometimes, she wondered if he would be proud, or if he would only see the hollow inside her now. The general ended the debate with a hand, his palm smacking against the wood. The sound cut the air like a blade. It settled, valley route, dawn. The room erupted, claps, cheers, laughter. And her silence deepened. When the meeting ended, the air outside hit her sharp. Night had spread fully now, the cold settling against her skin. Flags above the compound snapped in the wind, the fabric sounding tired, frayed at the edges. She walked away from the voices, away from the light spilling from the windows, toward the edges of the compound where shadows ruled. Her boots crunched gravel with each step, heavy but steady. Each step sounded like a reminder of everything unsaid. Why hadn't she spoken? She stopped near the training field, empty at this hour. The steel bars stood tall and lifeless, their shadows long under the pale moonlight. She pressed her hand against one, the metal cold, grounding her. She thought of the last time she had spoken, the way men had glanced at her with smirks, as though her voice carried less weight simply because it belonged to her. The way her warning had been brushed aside with a laugh. And then, the way those men had screamed when the mission turned. What good had speaking done? Her hand slid down the steel, fingers tightening. The answer echoed inside her. Words don't save, action does. But what action? She heard footsteps behind her. Quick, then slower, she turned. Ramirez, the sergeant whose face bore lines carved from years of war. His shoulders slouched, his boots dragged slightly as though every step carried ghosts. He lit a cigarette, the glow painting his face orange for a heartbeat. "You didn't say a word in there," he said, his voice low, almost accusing. She didn't answer. He exhaled smoke into the night. "You think it's suicide, don't you?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. He gave a short, dry chuckle. "Thought so, you're not wrong, but you know how it is. Command doesn't change for people like us. We're ghosts, they don't hear ghosts." Ghosts? That word hit harder than his smoke. Because wasn't that what she was already? Breathing, walking, fighting, but hollow, carrying more names of the dead than of the living. Ramirez dropped his cigarette, crushing it beneath his boot. He didn't wait for her reply. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will come, whether we want it or not." His voice faded with his footsteps until he was gone, swallowed by shadow. She stood there longer, the wind brushing strands of hair against her cheek. Tomorrow. Her chest tightened. She turned back to her quarters. Inside, the room was small, almost bare. A lamp glowed weakly, its yellow light casting shadows that made the walls feel closer. Her rifle leaned against the wall, the metal gleaming, polished, perfect. She didn't touch it. She sat on the bed, boots still laced, hands resting on her knees. The silence in the room pressed against her ears, heavy, thick, almost unbearable. She closed her eyes. Her brother's voice again, his laugh, his dare, his words, "You're stronger than you believe." Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She had stopped crying years ago. Soldiers don't cry where anyone can see. Sleep never came, only fragments of dreams, the crunch of boots in gravel, the sudden crack of rifles, the sound of men who had once laughed in rooms like tonight, now screaming in valleys like tomorrow's. When the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, the camp woke. Engines rumbled alive. Orders barked across the yard. Boots marched in rhythm. She moved with them, helmet secured, vest tightened, rifle slung. Her movements were precise, each one mechanical, practiced, rehearsed 1,000 times. The mask returned. But behind the mask, something shifted. She walked among them, blending in. To anyone watching, she was one more shadow in the crowd, but inside, resolve replaced silence. She would not let this plan drag them to the same fate as before. She would not let her silence become another graveyard. They cheered the plan, but she was already preparing to break it. And when the valley swallowed them, she would be ready. She stood in the pale dawn light, her breath visible in the cold air. Engines roared behind her, trucks lined up, soldiers clambering onto benches with packs slung, rifles resting between their knees. The compound smelled of diesel and dust. She adjusted her helmet strap tighter than usual. Her hands didn't shake. Not yet. But deep inside, something pulsed, something like a drumbeat warning her that every step from here forward could be the one that broke them. The valley waited. The convoy moved out with the confidence of men who believed danger lived elsewhere. Boots stomped against metal floors, laughter carried through the air, radios crackled with good-natured banter. They joked, they teased, they filled the silence with anything but fear. But she stayed quiet. Her eyes scanned the horizon, every curve of the mountains, every shadow stretching across the dirt roads. Her rifle rested across her lap, her fingers brushing the safety switch as though grounding herself in its weight. No one noticed. "Hey," the voice came from across the bench, Corporal Lewis, young, maybe 22, too young. His face still held the softness of someone who hadn't lost enough yet. "You're always so serious. First mission jitters." She didn't answer right away. He smiled nervously, waiting. She caught the way his boot tapped against the truck floor, restless energy, fear disguised as cockiness. "Not my first," she said finally, her voice low. Lewis chuckled, scratching at his chin. "Yeah, but this is mine." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Don't tell the others, but I barely slept. My dad used to say, only fools sleep easy before a fight. Guess I'm smart then." She studied him. The way he forced a grin, the way his eyes darted toward the others as if seeking reassurance. He was terrified, but trying to carry it with pride. She nodded once. "Your dad wasn't wrong." For a second his shoulders dropped, as if her words gave him permission to feel what he already felt. He leaned back, silent now, gripping his rifle a little tighter. She looked away, out at the horizon again. The mountains grew closer with every mile. Sharp edges, jagged cliffs, their peaks dusted with snow, beautiful in their stillness. But beauty in war was always dangerous. Beauty meant distraction. Beauty meant you forgot where the enemy might hide. Her gut twisted. She could almost feel the valley breathing ahead of them, waiting. The convoy slowed as the dirt road narrowed. The laughter quieted, replaced by the grind of tires against rock, the groan of engines straining on uneven ground. Men shifted uncomfortably, some adjusting helmets, others checking magazines. Silence settled in. Then the radio crackled. "Approaching entry point, 10 minutes." Her chest tightened. She saw it now, the mouth of the valley, a narrowing of the earth, where cliffs on both sides rose like jaws ready to close. The air itself seemed heavier here, sound carrying differently. She could already hear the faint echoes of their engines bouncing off the stone. No one else reacted. She swallowed hard. Her silence screamed inside her, "Stop, don't go in, this is wrong." But the trucks kept rolling forward. The general's vehicle led, flag strapped to the antenna, dust swirling behind the tires. He sat tall, confident, scanning ahead as though daring the earth to defy him. The trucks entered the valley. The air changed instantly, cooler. Shadows stretched long even though the sun had risen higher. Sound warped, bouncing unnaturally. Every cough, every gear shift echoed against stone. Her grip on her rifle tightened. Her pulse hammered in her ears. And then she noticed something. A bird, small, dark, perched on the cliff edge above. It fluttered suddenly, wings beating, and vanished into the distance. Her throat went dry. It wasn't the bird itself. It was what it meant: movement, disturbance. Something had scared it from its perch. Her eyes scanned the ridge. Nothing, only stone, only shadows. But she knew. The trucks pressed deeper. Dust kicked up, clouding the air, settling into throats. Men coughed, joked lightly about the rough ride. But she wasn't listening, she was watching. And then there, a flash, just a flicker, metal against stone, too deliberate. Her heart seized. She opened her mouth, then stopped. What if she was wrong? What if it was just sunlight? Just nerves? She could shout, she could stop the convoy, and if she was wrong, they would never listen to her again. But if she stayed silent? The radio crackled again. Halfway through, maintained speed. Her hands trembled against the rifle. She clenched them tight, forcing them still. Then it happened. A sound cut through the air, not laughter, not engines, not voices. A sharp whistle, too fast, too close. The explosion tore the world apart. The ground shook. Fire burst from the lead truck, flames swallowing metal, men thrown against dirt. Screams ripped the valley. Dust choked the air, smoke twisting upward. Her ears rang. The world blurred, slowed. She felt herself slammed sideways as the truck braked hard, soldiers tumbling. She hit the metal frame, pain slicing through her ribs, but she forced her eyes open. The lead truck was gone, a ball of flame, shadows of men crawling, some not moving at all. Gunfire erupted next. Sharp cracks echoed from the cliffs. Muzzle flashes lit the rocks. Bullets rained down, pinging against armor, tearing into dirt. Ambush. Just as she had known. Chaos consumed the convoy. Men shouted, scrambling for cover. Radios screamed with overlapping calls. Smoke thickened, blinding. Her chest heaved. She pressed herself against the truck wall, her rifle in her hands now, barrel up, safety off. Her instincts screamed, move, fight, survive. She saw Lewis, the young corporal. His eyes were wide, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. He clutched his rifle like a lifeline, frozen. She grabbed his arm, yanking him down behind the truck frame just as bullets sparked against the metal where his head had been. His eyes locked on hers, terrified, grateful. "Breathe," she hissed, "breathe and aim." He nodded frantically, forcing himself steady. She peeked up quick, scanning the cliffs. Shadows moved. Men in dark clothing, rifles braced, firing relentlessly. She exhaled, aimed, fired once. A figure crumpled, tumbling down the rocks. But there were too many. The convoy was pinned. Her silence had brought them here. Her heart ached with guilt and fury all at once. She wanted to scream it at the sky. I knew, and I said nothing. The general's voice boomed over the radio, strained but commanding. Push forward, out of the kill zone. Go, go, go. But she knew better. They weren't getting out clean, not now. The trucks lurched forward, engines roaring, tires spinning against dirt. Men fired upward desperately, bullets ricocheting, echoes deafening. The valley had become a cage of fire and smoke. Her breath came fast, her body trembling with adrenaline. She pulled Lewis along, pushing him behind better cover as another explosion tore the ground ahead. The shockwave lifted dirt, rocks, and screams into the air. She dropped, ears ringing again, chest slamming against the earth. Her ribs screamed in pain. She coughed, dust filling her lungs, eyes stinging. But she pushed up, forced her body to move, forced her mind to focus. Because she had made a choice in that moment. She would not be silent again. Not here, not today. She raised her rifle, firing again into the cliffs, her voice finally breaking into the chaos as she shouted for the others. High left ridge, focus fire, now. Men turned, obeying instinctively. Their shots concentrated, cutting into the ridge she had seen movement on. Shadows fell. The pressure on that side eased. Her voice carried, her silence shattered. And for the first time they listened. But the battle was only beginning. How long can silence last before it becomes unbearable? The valley had turned into a storm of sound. Gunfire cracked, bullets ricocheted, engines roared in desperation. The air reeked of burning diesel and blood. Yet inside her, for a fleeting second, there was only silence. A suffocating silence. The kind that comes after an explosion when your ears ring so loudly it feels like the world has gone mute. She blinked through the haze, her vision swimming with smoke and dust. Shapes moved, but not all of them moved with life. Men crawled, dragged, some didn't move at all. The fire from the lead truck raged brighter, throwing orange light against the cliff walls, shadows dancing like cruel specters. She felt it, the guilt clawing already. I knew, and I said nothing. Another burst of gunfire snapped her back. She ducked lower, pressing her back against the twisted metal of the truck she sheltered behind. Her ribs ached from the earlier impact, each breath stabbing sharp, but pain was a luxury she couldn't afford. Reloading, someone shouted. Voices overlapped, panic, desperation, orders barked but not followed. The chain of command was breaking under the weight of chaos. She risked a glance upward. The ridges above crawled with movement. Enemy fighters shifted from rock to rock, firing down with deadly precision. She counted quickly, too many. Dozens, maybe more. And then Lewis. She spotted him a few feet away, crouched low, his hands trembling as he tried to swap magazines. His lips moved soundlessly, maybe praying, maybe just cursing under his breath. She pushed toward him, low to the ground, dirt grinding into her palms. Bullets smacked into the earth nearby, kicking up sprays of dust. She slid into cover beside him, grabbing his shaking hands to steady them. "Focus," she hissed. "I can't," his voice cracked. His eyes darted everywhere, wild, unfocused. "You can." She forced the words sharp, firm. She pressed the magazine into his hands. "Breathe, one shot at a time." His gaze locked onto hers. For a moment his panic softened, replaced by something steadier. He nodded. She turned back to the fight, firing into the ridge again. Her shots were deliberate, controlled. Each pull of the trigger was a release of the storm inside her, a refusal to let guilt consume her here, not yet. But the truth pressed harder, they weren't winning. Another explosion erupted, this time behind them. The last truck in the convoy disappeared in a ball of flame, the shockwave knocking men flat. Their cage had closed, front and back. The general's voice cut through the radio, strained but commanding. "All units push forward, break through, go." "Forward." She looked at the narrow stretch of road ahead. It was choked with smoke, fire, debris. Bodies lay in the dirt. Forward wasn't escape. Forward was more death. She clenched her jaw. Ramirez appeared suddenly, sliding into cover near her. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes bloodshot. "We're pinned, we can't stay here." "Forward is a grave," she shot back. He met her gaze, reading something in her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. His lips tightened. "What do you suggest, Ghost?" Her breath caught. Ghost, the word from last night. It had stung then, it fueled her now. She peeked up again, scanning quickly. The enemy fire came heavy from two ridges, the left high ridge where she'd called earlier and now the right side higher up. But she noticed something. The fire wasn't even. It pulsed, shifted. They weren't everywhere. There were gaps. A pattern. She pressed her back against the truck, her chest rising and falling fast. Her silence had brought them here. Her silence had cost them already. But maybe, just maybe, her voice could save what was left. She gritted her teeth, then shouted over the chaos. "Cover fire, high right ridge, suppress now." Her voice was sharp, cutting through. For a second heads turned, surprise, but then almost instinctively some obeyed. Rifles swung up, fire concentrated. The ridge lit with sparks as bullets hammered rock. Enemy fire faltered. Shadows shifted, retreating slightly. Ramirez looked at her, eyebrows raised. A small, grim nod followed. "Keep it up," she yelled. "Left ridge suppress in 5. She counted silently, then called it, "Now." Shots redirected. The air filled with the thunder of focused fire. The cliffs lit with sparks. Enemy silhouettes ducked for cover. The momentum shifted, just slightly, but it shifted. She felt her chest burn, not from smoke but from something fiercer. Resolve. Then another scream. She turned sharply. A soldier lay sprawled in the dirt, clutching his leg, blood pooling fast. Two others scrambled to drag him back, bullets snapping around them. One fell mid-grab, a shot tearing through his shoulder. Her stomach knotted. She wanted to run to them, but her mind screamed, "Don't break cover, don't die reckless." Her rifle shook in her hands, not from fear this time, but from rage. Ramirez grabbed her arm. "We can't hold much longer." The radio cracked again, voices frantic, overlapping. The general shouting to push forward. Another officer screaming for air support. Static swallowing both. Her jaw tightened. She made her choice. "We don't push forward," she snapped at Ramirez. "We hold, we cut their fire, then we pull out back through the gap." His eyes widened. "Back, the road's blocked." "Not fully, there's space, I saw it. Rear truck went down, but there's a gap left. We go back, we survive." Ramirez stared at her, smoke swirling between them. For a heartbeat he didn't answer. Then he nodded once. "Then make them listen." Her chest heaved. She looked at the men around her, faces streaked with dirt, eyes wide, rifles clutched like lifelines. Some looked at her already, waiting for direction, maybe without even realizing it. She swallowed hard. Her voice had been silenced for too long, but not now. She raised her rifle, fired a burst into the cliffs, then shouted loud enough to cut through the storm. "Hold your ground, suppress left and right. Backward is our way out. Move when I say." For a moment there was hesitation, confusion. But then slowly voices echoed back, "Copy, got it," and rifles swung as ordered. The general's voice cracked over the radio, furious. Who the hell gave that order? She ignored it. Because in that moment, in the heart of the valley, she knew. His voice was certainty, but certainty didn't save lives. Her silence had once killed. Her voice might yet save. She braced, aimed, fired again. Her chest burned, her ribs ached, her ears rang, but her voice carried. "Hold fire steady, wait for my mark." The valley echoed with thunder. Shadows crumbled from the cliffs. Smoke thickened, covering movement. Her silence was gone. And for the first time, she felt alive. The valley had become a furnace. Smoke poured like a living thing, swallowing sky and stone, rolling down the ridges until everything below choked on it. The roar of fire mixed with the endless crack of rifles, the screaming hum of ricochets. Every second stretched into eternity. She crouched low, her rifle braced against the hot steel of the half-ruined truck, her hands slick with sweat and blood she couldn't tell was hers. Her lungs burned as if the smoke had reached inside, clawing through her ribs. "Suppress right, hold it," she barked. The men obeyed, some barely standing, some bleeding, but they obeyed. The bursts of gunfire from above sputtered in response, the enemy ducking back into cover, just for moments. But moments here were lifelines. Ramirez's voice cut in, raw and ragged. "They're regrouping. You've bought us seconds, not minutes." "I only need seconds," she shot back. Her eyes scanned the rear through the smoke, through the flashes of fire. There it was. The gap she'd seen earlier, jagged and narrow where the last truck had gone up in flames. The blast had thrown burning debris across the road, but not enough to seal it. A sliver remained. Survivable, barely. The radio crackled again. The general's voice thundered through, static chewing at his fury. "Who's giving those orders? Who the hell told you to fall back? Forward is the objective. Forward is survival." His words rang false. Survival wasn't forward, she knew it in her bones. Forward was fire, forward was slaughter. She pressed the radio mic against her lips, her voice cold and sharp. "Forward is a kill box. Rear gap is our exit. We move back or we don't move at all." The channel went dead silent for half a beat. Then his reply, booming, seething. "You disobey me and you'll hang for it. Do you hear me? You'll burn your career, your name, everything." Her throat clenched. She could almost feel the weight of his words, chains threatening to drag her down. Her silence had always been a shield. Safe, untouchable, but safety meant nothing if it left these men in graves. She pressed the transmit button again, her voice steady. "Then I'll burn with them, but at least they'll be alive." The channel exploded in static. Maybe his reply, maybe just the valley's interference. She didn't care. "Ramirez," she snapped, turning. "Get the wounded moving. Anyone who can't run, drag. Anyone who can shoot, cover." His eyes burned into hers, testing her resolve. But there was no hesitation left in her voice. He nodded, shouting orders. The men stirred, slow, pained, but moving. Crawling to their feet, dragging brothers across dirt, stumbling toward the gap through choking smoke. Bullets rained harder. The enemy saw it too, the shift, the pull. They poured fire down in desperation, rattling the cliffs like thunder. The gap wouldn't stay open long. She slammed a fresh mag into her rifle, peeking over cover. Shadows flickered on the ridges. shapes moving fast to cut them off. "Lewis," she shouted. The boy turned, eyes wide but steadier than before. "See those rocks left flank ridge? Keep their heads down. Don't stop unless you're dry." His throat bobbed as he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She almost smiled at that ma'am, but the world had no space for smiles. He rose just enough to fire, rounds snapping out sharp and precise. His hand still shook, but his aim held. "Good," she whispered. Ramirez's voice bellowed from the rear. "Wounded moving. 10 down, 5 stable, 3 barely." "Keep them moving," she cut him off. Then the ground shook again. A deafening blast ripped the air apart. Rocks and dirt rained from the cliffs as a mortar shell detonated close, throwing men off their feet. The earth itself seemed to scream. Her ears rang. Her vision spun. But through the haze she saw them, 2 soldiers crawling, uniforms aflame, their cries piercing even the ringing in her skull. Without thinking, she moved. She broke cover, sprinting across the dirt, smoke swirling around her. Bullets snapped past, one grazing her arm, tearing fabric and skin, but she didn't stop. She dropped to her knees beside the burning men, rolling one in the dirt, smothering flames with her own body. Her skin seared, pain exploding white-hot, but the fire went out. The second soldier's screams weakened. His chest barely rose. She pressed a trembling hand to his throat, pulse faint but there. "Ramirez," she screamed hoarsely. 2 shadows rushed forward, grabbing the wounded, dragging them back. She stumbled with them, her vision blurring, blood dripping from her arm. Back in cover, she gasped for breath, lungs clawing at the smoke. Her arm throbbed, every heartbeat a hammer of pain, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The radio crackled again. The general's voice, this time colder, almost detached. "You'll answer for this insubordination, if you survive." She closed her eyes briefly. His certainty was a cage. Her silence had once kept her chained inside it, but now her voice was the only key left. She pressed the mic again, whispering so only the channel caught it. "Then I'll survive enough to answer." She dropped the mic, lifted her rifle, and shouted, "Move, move now." The convoy surged, broken men limping, dragging, bleeding, but moving. She covered them, firing burst after burst, her vision narrowing to a tunnel of smoke and sparks. Lewis's rifle cracked beside hers, Ramirez's deeper bursts answering from the other side. The gap loomed closer, wider now through the smoke. The rear of the valley beyond it, freedom, or at least a chance. But the enemy saw it too. Figures broke from the ridges, rushing down the slopes, firing wild as they charged to close the gap. Their shouts echoed, a savage chorus. "Contact close," Ramirez bellowed. "Hold them," she screamed. The world exploded into chaos. Rifles rattled, grenades burst, dirt and fire filled the air. Men collided in the smoke, blades flashing, rifles turning to clubs. The fight became primal, savage, survival in its rawest form. She dropped one attacker with a burst to the chest, swung her rifle into another's face, bone crunching under steel. Pain lanced through her burned arm, but she drove a knee into the man's gut, shoving him back. Ramirez went down to one knee, blood pouring from a cut across his temple, but he rose again, swinging his rifle butt into an enemy jaw. Lewis screamed as someone lunged at him, blade flashing. She spun, firing, the man dropping mid-strike. Lewis's face was pale, but his rifle steadied, firing back. Step by step, body by body, they pushed toward the gap. "Go," she roared, her throat raw. "Through the gap now." The first survivors broke through, stumbling out of the smoke into the open. Then more, then more. The tide shifted, life dragging itself free of death's valley. But not all, some lay still, some didn't rise. And in the chaos, a figure emerged, tall, broad, enemy rifle raised, his eyes locking on her. She lifted her rifle, but her mag clicked empty. Time slowed. The man's finger tightened on the trigger. Then Lewis again. A single shot cracked. The enemy's chest burst red, his body crumpling into the dirt. She turned, breathless. Lewis lowered his rifle, his hand steady at last. His eyes met hers, and for a moment they shared something unspoken: fear, survival, and the weight of choices. She slammed a fresh mag in, turned, and kept firing. The last of their wounded cleared the gap. Ramirez grabbed her arm, pulling hard. "That's it, we're through." She glanced back once. The valley burning, bodies strewn, smoke curling like fingers around stone. Then forward, the gap, escape, the unknown beyond. Her lungs burned, her body screamed, her heart thundered. But her voice carried one last time through the storm. "Move, all of you, move." And they did. Together they broke through the gap, leaving the valley of fire behind them. Her silence was gone, but so was any way back. The world outside the valley was silent. Not peace, not safety, just a silence so sharp it felt unnatural, as though even the wind refused to carry the screams they'd left behind. The smoke still curled above the cliffs, a dirty crown marking where they had come from. They stumbled into it like ghosts. Men limping, men carrying men, men staring blankly as though they'd already died and just hadn't fallen yet. She walked at the rear, her rifle low but ready, her eyes sweeping the ridges. Every rock looked like a figure. Every shadow twitched like a sniper's scope. The silence was worse than the gunfire. Gunfire meant you had something to fight. Silence meant you were waiting to be hunted. Ramirez limped beside her, his head bandaged with a strip of someone's torn uniform. Blood still seeped through. He kept looking at her, as though trying to measure if she had finally broken, or if she was the only thing keeping them upright. Lewis stumbled forward, his rifle dangling from tired hands. He looked younger now, his shoulders sagging under more than the weight of the weapon. His eyes flicked to hers when he thought she wasn't looking. Guilt, relief, fear, all tangled in the same glance. They walked until the ground leveled out, until the valley became a jagged line behind them. Then the men collapsed where they stood, dropping into dirt and rock, too exhausted to care about cover. She stayed standing. Her hands trembled as she tried to reload, fingers fumbling on the cold steel of the magazine. She stopped. The rounds rattled like teeth in a skull. She sank to one knee, staring at the dirt. For the first time since the ambush began, her silence returned, not as protection but as a weight. How many? The thought clawed at her chest. How many hadn't made it through? How many lay burning in that valley, their bodies twisted under stone and fire, their faces she would never see again? She counted names in her head, faces, smiles in mess halls, laughs that used to echo in tents, voices cut off mid-word by a mortar's roar. She clenched her fists until her nails dug bloody crescents into her palms. And then she heard him. "Why?" Lewis's voice, quiet, fragile. She lifted her head. He sat on a rock, elbows on knees, staring at the ground. His voice cracked when he spoke again. "Why'd you risk it? You could have left us, followed orders. No one would have blamed you." She watched him. The boy who'd almost dropped his rifle hours ago, now asking her why she hadn't left him to die. Her throat tightened. "Because." The word rose in her chest, but it stuck there. Too simple, too shallow. She couldn't tell him because I had to. Couldn't tell him because I've lost too many before. Couldn't tell him because you looked like someone I once knew, and I couldn't let that ghost happen again. She turned away, unable to answer. Ramirez filled the silence, his voice rough. She risked it because someone had to. He spat blood into the dirt. "Don't question it, kid, just breathe." But Lewis's eyes never left her, searching, demanding. Her silence was an answer he didn't want, and one she couldn't break. The radio crackled again. The general. His voice was calm now, almost eerily so. "I have your coordinates, reinforcements en route, hold position." Every man who heard it stiffened. Reinforcements, it should have been hope, but the way he said it there was no warmth, No relief, only a cold promise. She knew what it meant. They weren't sending help, they were sending judgment. Ramirez muttered, "He'll bury us under paperwork if not bullets." She stayed quiet, but the thought twisted in her gut. The general didn't need to kill them. He could erase them. Reports, courts, careers shredded, men painted as failures, and her labeled insubordinate, reckless, dangerous. But worse than all of that was the possibility they'd all die before anyone arrived. The silence stretched. Men shifted, groaned, tried to sleep against rocks. She walked a few paces away, the night pressing in, the stars indifferent above them. Her arm burned where the bullet had grazed, her skin blistered where flames had licked her. But the pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the weight in her chest. She thought of her father, the uniform he wore when he left home, the medal in the box her mother never opened again, the folded flag handed to her small hands, too heavy for her to hold. He had gone where orders sent him. He hadn't come back. And now here she was in his shadow, facing the same choice: obey and die, or disobey and live at the cost of everything else. The memory clawed at her, sharp and merciless. She whispered to the night words only the dirt could hear. "I won't die like you did, not for silence." Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She'd lost the ability years ago. Behind her the men stirred. Lewis had dozed off, his rifle still in his lap. Ramirez sat upright, watching her with that tired, heavy gaze that carried its own scars. "You know," he said, voice low, "some of them hate you for it." She turned. "For disobeying," he continued. "They think you doomed their careers, made them traitors by following you. Soldiers want to believe orders mean safety. You tore that belief apart." Her jaw tightened. And Ramirez said, leaning back against the rock, "Others would follow you again in a heartbeat, because you did what no one else had the spine to do." His eyes met hers. "That scares them more than dying." She said nothing. There was nothing to say. He already knew her silence wasn't surrender, it was survival. The night deepened. Coyotes cried somewhere far off. The men drifted into uneasy sleep, one by one. She stayed awake. Every sound set her nerves on edge. The crunch of stone, the whisper of wind, the faint click that might have been metal shifting. Her hand never left her rifle. At some point, Lewis stirred, mumbling in his sleep. A name. She didn't catch it, but it was whispered with such pain that it hollowed her chest. Who had he left behind? Who waited for him? The question lingered until dawn. When the first gray light bled across the horizon, she rose, stiff and aching. Ramirez was already awake, watching the ridges. "We can't stay here," he muttered. She nodded. "We move." The men groaned as they woke, blinking against the pale light. Their bodies screamed for rest, but their eyes saw the truth, the smoke still rising in the distance, the silence that was too heavy. She rallied them with few words, just a look, a nod, a hand steadying one as he staggered to his feet. Sometimes leadership wasn't commands. It was the act of standing when no one else could. As they began to march again, the radio hissed once more. The general's voice, sharp now, as though he sensed her defiance even across the miles. "You're out of line. Reinforcements are delayed. You'll hold position until further notice. That's an order." Her hand hovered over the mic. The men looked at her, waiting, hopping, fearing. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her back on the radio, lifted her rifle, and began walking. Every step forward was another step away from silence, another step toward choices she could own, even if they damned her. The men followed. The valley behind them smoldered. The path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in years, her silence wasn't obedience. It was defiance. And it was louder than any order ever given. The first shot didn't come from ahead. It came from behind. A crack echoed across the rocks, sharp and clean. One of the men in the rear stumbled, blood spraying from his shoulder as he dropped to his knees. "Contact rear," Ramirez roared. Panic surged through the ranks. Men scrambled for cover, throwing themselves against stone, dragging the wounded down into dust. She spun, rifle up, eyes scanning the ridges. Figures moved in the distance, small shapes on the cliffs where the smoke still lingered. The enemy hadn't let them go. They were tracking, stalking, hurting. The men fired back wild, desperate shots that sparked against rock but rarely found flesh. The enemy stayed far enough away to sting but not bleed. Not yet. A hunt, that's what this was. She pressed her shoulder against stone, steadying her breathing. Her scope caught a flicker just enough. She squeezed the trigger. One shape dropped, the others ducked. For a moment the firing stopped. Then came the echo of laughter. Cold, cruel, drifting across the rocks like a ghost. Her gut twisted. This wasn't just pursuit, it was a game. Ramirez crawled beside her, face pale, bandage seeping. "They're driving us, won't rush us. They'll bleed us dry until we're too weak to fight." She nodded, the truth tasted like ash. The men looked at her, wide-eyed, waiting, expecting. Some wanted orders, some wanted comfort, some wanted miracles. Her silence pressed in again, heavier than the smoke, heavier than the bullet she could still feel grazing her arm. "What now?" The question hung in their eyes. She forced herself to stand, ignoring the tremor in her legs. Her voice cut through the tension. "We move, now." Lewis blinked. "Move where? They've got every ridge." "We don't give them the choice," she snapped. "We move fast, we move low, we break their game before they tighten it." Her certainty wasn't total, but certainty wasn't the point. Belief was. The men rose, slowly, reluctantly, but they rose. They pushed forward, weaving between jagged stones, ducking low when the cliffs groaned with gunfire. Every shot cracked the air like a whip. Every ricochet sparked like fireflies in hell. Her heart hammered, but her mind stayed sharp. Angles, cover, distance. She measured everything as though the math itself could keep them alive. Half an hour passed, maybe more. The firing ebbed and flowed, a predator's rhythm, always near, never gone. Ramirez panted hard, his limp worsening. "We can't keep this pace." She glanced at him, the sweat soaked through his uniform, his face gray beneath the dirt and blood. He was breaking. So were the others, shoulders sagging, feet dragging, breaths coming in ragged gasps. Then Lewis spoke, quiet but sharp enough to cut. "They don't want us alive." Everyone froze. The words hung there heavy. He looked at her, his eyes raw, his voice cracking. "So why keep running? Why not turn and fight?" The men muttered, some nodding, some shaking their heads, fear pulling in every direction. She stared at the boy. He wasn't wrong, but fighting meant dying here, on rocks no one would remember. Her voice came low, steady. "Because someone has to live, even if it's only one. Someone has to walk out and tell the truth." The words cut through the murmurs. For some it was enough, for others it was. But they kept moving. Hours blurred. The sun rose higher, burning down on their backs. The air shimmered with heat. Water bottles ran dry. Lips cracked. Every step ground their resolve thinner. Her body screamed with every move. Burned skin pulling tight, arm throbbing with every heartbeat. But she pushed. Because stopping wasn't an option. They crested a ridge at last, and the sight froze them. Below stretched a dry riverbed, wide and empty, a natural funnel. High cliffs lined either side, perfect for an ambush. The men groaned. "No way through," one muttered. Ramirez spat into the dirt. "No choice either. Circle takes hours, we don't have hours." She studied it, the cliffs above, the shadows stretching long in the sun, the silence too thick. A trap undeniable. And yet, her father's voice whispered in memory, from nights when he'd trained her in the backyard, long before the uniform weighed on her shoulders. "Sometimes the only way out is through, but you don't walk it blind." She closed her eyes briefly, breath deep, then opened them with fire. Ramirez, you'll lead the wounded across. Lewis with him, keep them low, fast, tight. Lewis's eyes widened. What about you? I'll cover from the ridge. The men erupted. That's suicide, you'll never. She raised a hand, silencing them. Her voice was quiet but unyielding. It's not about me. It's about you making it across. Her silence had been her armor. Now her words were her blade. They moved, reluctant but obedient. Ramirez cursed under his breath, but he went, dragging the line of broken men toward the riverbed. She climbed, every rock tearing at her palms, every step shaking her wounded arm. Her body begged her to stop, but her will dragged her higher. From the top, the world spread wide. The riverbed below, her men small shadows crawling across it, and in the cliffs beyond, movement, figures waiting, triggers half squeezed. She steadied her rifle, breath slow. Her scope found the first target, one shot, a body dropped. The ambush snapped alive. Gunfire tore the air. The men below screamed, running, stumbling, diving. She fired again, and again, pinning down what she could, forcing heads into dust. The enemy turned on her. Bullets cracked past, sparks biting the rock. She hugged stone, shifted, fired again. Her world narrowed to the trigger, each squeeze a heartbeat, each shot a life. Below, Ramirez dragged men forward, roaring curses and commands. Lewis covered his side, firing in frantic bursts, his voice breaking as he shouted for men to run. The riverbed became a storm of dust and death. Her scope caught a flash. Enemy moving closer, trying to flank. She swung, fired, dropped him. But there were too many. A grenade burst near the men, the blast flinging bodies. Dust swallowed everything. Her heart clenched. She couldn't see who was left. She fired until her rifle clicked empty. Hands shaking, she slammed another mag in. Her throat burned as she screamed into the radio, "Run! Run, damn it!" Through the dust, figures moved. Ramirez hauling 2 men, Lewis dragging another, others crawling, limping, pushing. She covered them until her vision blurred, until her body shook with exhaustion. Then at last, they cleared the riverbed, stumbling into cover on the far side. Ramirez's voice roared across the comms, "We're through." Relief flooded her chest, but it lasted only seconds. Because then she realized she was still on the ridge, and the enemy was closing in. The convoy slowed, engines grumbling low, tires grinding over gravel. Alina sat in the back, helmet off, her hair damp with sweat beneath the dull glow of a failing overhead light. She kept her eyes on the horizon, nothing but sand, silence, and a wind that carried dust like whispers. Something was wrong. She could feel it, deep in her chest, like the pause before a storm breaks. The men around her joked half-heartedly. One lit a cigarette, the glow sharp in the dim. Another tried humming an old song, but his voice cracked halfway through. Their nerves betrayed them, and though they looked at Alina for reassurance, she gave none. Because her silence was already saying too much. The night before, she had dreamt of her brother again, the same memory, the same smile, before he vanished into a war he never returned from. She woke with her pulse racing, unsure if it was grief or warning. Now, staring at the barren stretch ahead, she realized both were true. "Why are we stopping?" one of the younger soldiers muttered, hand fidgeting near his rifle. The commander in the front waved it off. "Routine check, just hold steady." But Alina's gut twisted. Nothing about this was routine. The desert didn't stop for them, so why were they stopping for it? Her fingers tightened around the strap of her pack. She leaned forward. "We shouldn't be here long. Move us through." Her voice was steady, low. But the commander gave her a dismissive glance, the kind men give when they don't want to admit fear. He turned back to his radio, pretending to be in control. That silence pressed harder. It wasn't long before the truth revealed itself. A soft click, almost too faint to notice. Then another. The kind of sound only someone who'd lived too long in war would recognize: triggers, pressure plates, metal beneath sand. Alina's eyes snapped wide. Out now. But her warning came half a second too late. The blast ripped through the night, tearing the first vehicle apart in a roar of fire and shrapnel. The shockwave slammed into them, rattling bones, throwing men to the floor. Screams erupted, smoke choking the air. Dust blinded everything. For a moment Alina couldn't hear, just ringing, just silence. When sound returned, it came like a flood: groans, shouts, the crack of gunfire from somewhere unseen. Ambush. She dragged herself up, coughing, vision blurred. The convoy was burning, silhouettes writhing in orange light. One man staggered past her, clothes aflame, and collapsed in the sand. Another fired wildly into the dark, not even sure where the enemy was. And through it all, Alina moved with a terrible clarity. Her training took over, but it wasn't training alone. It was instinct, sharpened by grief and rage, by the memory of a brother who had once stood where she stood now. She pulled the wounded to cover, shouted orders when the commander froze, steadied rifles in trembling hands. Every motion was deliberate, each second stretched thin by adrenaline. But then she saw him. Private Ramirez, the youngest of them, barely 20. He was pinned beneath wreckage, flames inching closer. His cries cut sharper than the gunfire. Alina dropped her weapon, rushing into the fire, ignoring the heat that licked her arms, the smoke that seared her throat. She braced her body against the metal, straining, screaming as she forced it upward. His eyes locked onto hers, wide, desperate, terrified. "Don't let me die here," he gasped. "You won't." Her muscles burned, skin blistered, but she pulled with everything she had left. And finally, with a groan of steel, the wreckage shifted. She dragged him free, collapsing with him in the sand, both coughing, both alive. The battle raged on around them, but for a brief second there was only silence again. A silence filled not with fear this time, but with resolve. Alina looked back at the smoke, the flames, the chaos tearing through men who just hours ago had been joking and dreaming of going home. And she knew something in her had shifted. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about carrying them through, even when their leaders failed, even when silence was all they had left. As the night burned around her, she whispered to herself, a promise no one else could hear. "This ends with me, or it doesn't end at all." And in that vow, the desert's silence finally answered. Why did the silence after the last shot feel heavier than the gunfire itself? The desert was still burning, but the echoes had faded. Smoke curled into the morning light, a gray veil over broken machines and bodies that would never rise again. Alina stood among the wreckage, rifle low, chest heaving, her face streaked with ash and blood. The men who had survived looked at her, waiting, as if her breath alone kept them tethered to this side of the earth. But she said nothing. Silence had always been her language, and now that silence spoke louder than orders. Ramirez sat slumped beside her, his leg bandaged with torn cloth, eyes glassy but alive. He watched her with a kind of reverence, the way someone looks at a figure they can't quite understand, not a hero, but something heavier, someone carrying too much. The commander, once proud, sat apart, staring at his hands. He hadn't spoken since the blast. His authority was gone, stripped bare by fire and fear. In his silence there was shame. And in Alina's silence there was something else entirely. The survivors gathered scraps, dragged the wounded, whispered prayers into the rising sun. Every gesture felt like defiance, a refusal to vanish. But still, the question lingered among them, unspoken but piercing. What now? Alina felt it pressing against her chest. The mission had burned with the convoy. The plan they had cheered had ended in fire. All that remained was her silence, and the truth she hadn't yet told them. She knelt, pressing her hand into the sand. It was warm, almost alive, as if the desert itself remembered every death it had claimed. She thought of her brother, his laughter, his stubbornness, his promise that he'd come home. He never did. And now, standing here in the ruins, Alina understood. Her silence had never been about fear. It had been about knowing. She had seen this ending before, and she had tried quietly to warn them, but no one had listened. Now too many were gone. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. Instead, she rose and faced the men who still waited, eyes hollow but fixed on her. "We move," she said simply. Her voice was low, rough, but steady. They nodded, not because she had rank, not because she demanded it, but because in her silence they had finally heard the truth. Survival wasn't about orders. It was about will. So they moved, through the smoke, through the broken ground, through the weight of what they had lost. Each step was slow, deliberate. Each step was an act of defiance. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Water ran low. And still they moved. Ramirez stumbled once, but Alina caught him, slinging his arm over her shoulder, carrying his weight without complaint. The others saw it, her quiet strength, her refusal to falter, and something inside them reignited. Not hope, not yet, but endurance. By nightfall, they reached higher ground, overlooking the desert they had barely escaped. The fires behind them had dimmed, but the silence remained, heavy, eternal. The men gathered around, whispering about home, about what they'd say if they made it back, about the faces waiting for them. Each story was fragile, trembling, but it made them human again. Alina listened. She didn't speak. Her silence gave them space to believe. When Ramirez finally asked her why she hadn't spoken up sooner, why she had kept her warnings buried in her silence, she looked at him, eyes dark, tired but unbroken. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "no one wants to hear what saves them." He lowered his gaze, and she knew he understood. The night deepened. Stars cut sharp against the black, and for the first time in days, Alina let herself breathe without urgency. She sat apart, staring at the horizon, where the desert met the sky. She thought of her brother again, not the day he left, not the day she learned he was gone, but a quiet moment years before, a fire, a laugh, a silence between them that had felt safe. That silence had shaped her, and now it carried her. The others drifted into uneasy sleep. Alina stayed awake, listening, not to danger, not to ghosts, but to the silence itself. It no longer warned, it no longer pressed, it simply was. And in that stillness, she understood the lesson this desert had carved into her soul. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The screen would fade there on Alina's face, lit by starlight, her eyes steady, her silence louder than any victory song. And long after the story ends, the silence lingers.